Taylor Walker from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Shannon Hurd from the West Coast Eagles.
This is Nathan Jones from the Melbourne Football Club.
Phil Davis from the GWS Giants.
That's Brad Eaton from Port Adelaide Football Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. I hope you're well. We are in the month of December, and that is great news for fantasy coaches, because here's what's going to happen. In a matter of days, if you got Supercoach Gold or the Dream Team Assistant Coach feature, your team pickers are days away from landing. Gosh, depending on when you're listening to this, maybe it's already landed. For AFL fantasy coaches, the player price and position rollout, that's going to happen throughout December. That format will open up in January. But we wanted to take some time on this episode to chat through all of the positions, club by club, and talk through some of their fantasy relevance. To help me do that, I've got Jimmy. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hey, MJ. Hello, listeners. It's like Christmas come early here. I'm looking at a full list of every player and every position, and gee, it's nice.
There are some very interesting player additions. There are some very interesting player retains, and there are some interesting ones that didn't quite make it. What we're going to do is we'll go through club by club and really talk about the fantasy relevance of the guys that have gained a position, the guys that have maybe retained it that we thought might not have, and those that have lost and changed a DPP. From an Adelaide Football Club perspective, if we went straight there, probably right at the top of the list of the guys that, whether it be draft relevant or salary cap relevant, probably the one straight out of the gate that you can probably think of is Wayne Miller. He moves from a mid-forward that he that he had in the 2018 fantasy season. Now he's a defender only. There's a little bit of fantasy relevance for Wayne Miller isn't there, Jimmy? Maybe more draft than anything else, but there's something there.
Oh, there's definitely something. I mean, we've seen over the journey the Crows, halfbacks can get a few points amongst them. So if he's going to slot in nicely into that role and keep doing what he did and improve on that some more, I think he becomes very relevant. I'm keen to see what sort of price he's at and where he might fall in a draft league.
Well, that's going to be the really interesting thing, isn't it? His scores were solid enough. Like, he's going to be priced in that kind of mid-70s range. And again, by the time you're listening to this episode, the team pickers of your format could have landed. But really, once he got flipped back into that half-back role, we saw some incredible scores just out of the back: 80, 81, 112, 83, 91, 101. Up comparable numbers for Supercoach. They were Dream Team and AFL fantasy numbers. Brodie Smith, it did impact his numbers a little bit. Not massively, but enough to certainly cut off some of the ceiling edge there. I'm not too sure, mate. It's always dangerous to rule someone out in December, that they're not going to be as a part of your salary cap side. But with so many great defenders, some new ones and some ones that we're going to retain, you're really looking for a 90-plus average from a defender for them to be in your squad at some point in the year. Oh, I'm not sure I see that for Wayne in salary caps. Drafts, though, there's some relevance there.
Oh, definitely, yeah, I agree. He's much more relevant in drafts than he is salary, but I'm curious. I'm going to see what he does in preseason.
There's some stuff there, that is for sure. Darcy Fogarty has lost his DPP. He retains the forward part of that, but loses his midfield. And fair enough, he barely got outside of forward 50 in the handful of games he got for the Adelaide Crows. One of the interesting additions, again, more draft relevant than salary cap, Richie Douglas moves from a midfielder only to a mid-forward. He probably, Jimmy, moves from that potential of, okay, look, I'll stash him away on my extended bench, depending on the depth of your draft league, to all of a sudden, gosh, maybe he's your bench or your emergency cover in your forward line now.
Yeah, maybe. Is he still best 22 at the Crows? I don't know. He's
I think he and McKay are pushing for depth.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. I think if he's getting 22 games this year, you're in all sorts. So I don't know about that, but another one who's he was a forward last year and he's a forward this year, but he's got a different set of colours on him now. Is Tyson Stengel. I'm curious to see how he shapes up now.
Well, it's something that we're going to talk about, no doubt, countless times throughout the pre-season at the website and also here on the podcast, is the makeup of every single different side. And Adelaide have certainly, hopefully, learnt from what we've seen from the likes of Collingwood, West Coast and Richmond over the past kind of 2 years, where these smaller pressure applying forwards really impact games. And outside of Eddie Betts, Adelaide haven't had one. So the inclusion of McAdam, the inclusion of Stengel, and even in McHenry in the draft, you could see those three guys vying for that one spot in the side. Which of the three get it? Gosh, that's a bit hard to call it December. But you're right. I think there's something there with a couple of those guys that'll be cheap cash cows for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And another one that suddenly loses a lot of relevance, I think, now that he's lost his defence eligibility, is Paul Seedsman becomes a mid-only now after spending a year on a wing.
Yeah, no, exactly right. Fair enough. I got no problem with that decision at all. Moves from, draft relevant, even was salary cap relevant for kind of the first, half to 2/3 of the year. But yeah, look, he's almost undraftable at that stage unless somehow crazily Ultimate Footy choose to add defensive status to him. All salary cap formats start the same. Ultimate Footy starts the same, but then sometimes they like to add on their own. And unless they did that, you're not touching him anywhere. Some thought Hugh Greenwood might have picked up forward status. He's just stayed as that midfielder only. I think from my perspective, they're kind of the Crows from a positional perspective that have some relevance that you're going to talk about. There's plenty of premiums to look at in the back line, midfield, forward, but positionally, they're your big ones.
Yep, I'd agree with that completely. And
let's head over to the Brisbane. Sorry, mate.
No, you're right. I was about to say exactly what you just did. Having a look at Brisbane here.
Let's talk about the Lions.
Yeah.
And again, there's some guys here that I feel like their changes are going to give you some draft relevance, but maybe not a whole heap. The first one that kind of caught my eye, and again, maybe it depends on the depth of the draft league, but someone like a Ryan Lester, who's previously held dual position status as a mid forward, he's now a defensive only option. Again, depending on the depth of on-field defenders you need, there could be something there. Josh Walker's gone from DPP defender forward to just a pure defender. Whether or not he stays in the side with Marcus Adams coming in, I'm not certain about that.
You don't know.
But I think for their sake, I'd hope that's the case too.
I'm sure he's a lovely bloke, but yeah.
Reece Matheson. Exactly right. Reece Matheson retains his mid-forward DPP. He was a guy that plenty of people across the fantasy community thought would kind of break out last year. Never really got that role and opportunity. I know Beams is out, but Neil comes straight in. Have other Brisbane youngsters kind of passed him by?
Look, I think he's still going to get his opportunity this year, and I think he's good enough that he will break at some point, whether that's this year or next year, or whether it's at that club or somewhere else down the track. I don't know, but you'd think sooner or later it's going to happen, and those who do get on board at the right time are going to make sure they tell everyone all about it, I'm sure.
Oh, yes, they will. Cam Rayner has moved from a dual position mid forward to just a pure forward. Ben Keys has also just moved from forward status to midfielder. Mitch Robinson, he loves playing fight night and he also likes being a mid forward, so he's an option through there. Probably the big one from a Brisbane perspective that people thought was going to be a very relevant option if he retained his DPP. He has not. I'm referring to Hugh McCluggage. He's now just a midfielder only. He goes really, Jimmy, doesn't he, from someone that could break out to be a premium forward to now, if he does break out, he's going to, maybe he can push into that high 90s sort of average next year. But at this stage, I'd struggle to feel confident that he could reach a triple figure average. Look, anything's possible, but yeah. I'm not too sure that he's there just yet.
No, me neither, to be honest. As you say, if he'd kept that forward, he becomes very, very relevant, I think, as a genuine breakout contender, but not enough as a mid. I don't think he'll make you enough cash to warrant being a cow, and he certainly won't average enough to warrant being a keeper. So a handy type to jump on in a draft league, potentially, but certainly not in your salary formats, I don't think.
Yeah, I think so. So Tommy Cutler moves as a midfielder only, similar to a Paul Seedsman, goes from pretty relevant in drafts to pretty much fantasy irrelevance. Maybe Zach Bailey, maybe he's picked up mid-forward DPP. Maybe there's something there a little bit, but outside of that, for me, that feels like the positional relevance of the Brisbane Lions.
Yeah, I'd say so, mate. There's a lot of really interesting players there, and I'm keen to see which of those young Lions do step up next year, but positionally, I think we've covered that nicely.
All right, fair enough. No doubt, like we said, right throughout the fantasy preseason, throughout the month of January, February, and even into a bit of March, we will be analysing club by club, all the JLT matches, looking at the brand new rules and the 50 most relevant, which gets underway January 1st. When we talk about Carlton's fantasy relevancy from a positional change, Dale Thomas was handy enough as a mid-forward for us last year. He's gained defensive status. That's where he played a lot of last year with Sam Doherty going down injured. The big question I've got, Jimmy, about that is how do Carlton look to structure up as they prepare for the future? Doherty's coming back into the side. They've drafted relatively well another couple of young midfielders in Walsh and Stocker, and then they've added to their forward stocks with Mitch McGovern coming into the side. I don't see a role for him inside the forward 50 group. I can't see them bringing a 30-plus-year-old back up to the wing. So the role he plays, I'm really fascinated to see how Carlton choose to use him, and even a Cade Simpson in that regard as well.
Yeah, there's they've got to have a certain sort of balance, I suppose, in terms of the kids and then a bit of experience to guide them around. But yeah, like you, I just can't quite see where he fits in and who spot he would be or who he'd be keeping out of the team if they are playing him down back or anywhere else for that matter. So it's a really interesting one there, and especially down back, they've got so many of those running halfback types now between him and Doherty, and they brought Newman in as well, and of course Simpson, as you said. There's no shortage of that type of player. Is he really going to be the best one to fill that role?
Yeah, look, it's going to be interesting to see. No doubt they'll want to have some leadership and some experience in that side. They won't want to go full early days GWS. But look, that's the real interesting one. How do Carlton structure up? Their fans and the club are very bullish that they're going to bounce back, up the ladder a couple of spots. How far? That's the question. But
yeah,
I'm not sure. Definitely not salary cap relevant, Dale Thomas, maybe late in a draft, depending on the round you're picking him up. I can't see him averaging what he did last year, but look, I've been wrong before, and I'll probably be wrong again.
Oh, look, it happens to the best of us, eh?
Yeah, it's true. It just happens to me a lot more than anyone else. Nick Newman has gained defensive status. He's moved away from a midfielder. Again, he's in that category we just spoke about of players of, is he best 22? Some are really bullish on it. Some others think he's just there as depth and opportunities. How Carlton choose to structure that midfield group around Cripps with the assistance of those developing kids around them. And certainly you've got the likes of Curnow and Murphy that are bringing that extra experience. Where they choose to play Doherty, these are all the kind of fundamental questions that these variables kind of trigger where Newman plays, if Newman plays, and then what fantasy relevance is he? Because he has been a great scorer for us at times, granted as a cash cow, but we've seen a ceiling about him. Whether he has the luxuries that he does to do that, whether he has the role or even is in the side, these are all things we'll get to figure out as the preseason goes on.
Yeah, no, agreed.
Sam Petrevski-Seton is just a forward only. He loses the midfielder component of his DPP, similar with Garlett, but he's fantasy irrelevant. You're not getting anywhere near him. One I like the potential of, Paddy Dow. Yeah, he was a midfielder last year. He's now on mid-forward status. We see this a lot, Jimmy, don't we, with the second-year players, where they were midfielders only in their draft year, and then they pick up a defensive status or a forward status or a combination of the two. Paddy Dow doesn't have to do a lot more growth to become, in drafts, fantasy relevant.
Oh, absolutely. And I wouldn't be too surprised if either this year or next he does what Clayton Oliver did or a Jack McRae type has done and suddenly steps up from being a fairly good player to being bordering on that top line very, very quickly. He's a big fan of that kid.
So would he be someone, to kind of change tacks a little bit for a minute, is he someone that you kind of look to try to jump after in a keeper league right now? Like he averaged in the mid to high 50s across formats from, I think it was like 20 games he played last year. Is he the kind of guy you'd be jumping now on?
Oh, absolutely. He's that's the sort of player I love to target in a keeper league. Is your highly rated draft picks where they've got the goods about them. It's just a matter of time before they get there. But the people who used an early draft pick on them and get really impatient in their keeper leagues and want them scoring better than that right from day one, they might well be prepared to give him up for less than he should be worth, just because they're impatient. So no, I'd be all over that very quickly if I could.
All right, fair enough too. Will Setterfield retains his mid-forward status. He'll be one of the most highly selected players you'd believe in 2019 in salary caps. Barring something disastrous happening with his pricing, he's going to be one of, if not the most selected player next year.
Yeah, and rightly so. He's again, we don't necessarily expect the world out of him, but if he's priced as we think he will be, and with that dual position, there'd be no reason not to pick him.
Yeah, no, fair enough too. Sam Walsh and Liam Stocker, they're two top draft picks. Both of them are midfielders only. Again, whether you choose to play the premium on them as a draftee cash cow, I'm not so sure. It's certainly worth watching their pre-season. Both are going to get plenty of games. They paid a high price for Stocker, and certainly Sam Walsh has been one of the most consistent sort of rated players at junior level for such a long period of time, arguably one of the safest number one picks, the past handful of years, that's for sure. So I think they're both worth considering. But again, while we are talking positions in this sort of podcast, which is helpful when you look at all the different formats that we do here at Coaches Panel, it's kind of half of the equation, isn't it, Jimmy? The other half is the price tag attached to it, because who cares if they've got the position they need? If they're priced in a part that's out of the market or over the top, then who cares if they're positionally relevant? Their pricing could rule them out.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think it's an easy trap to fall into, but just because they've got that makes them relevant. But you've still got to be able to get that growth out of them one way or another.
Yep, absolutely. Let's talk about Collingwood, unless there's any other Blues that you're dying to really have a conversation about. Crisp keeps his defensive status as expected. I thought so, man. Levi Greenwood goes from mid-forward status to defensive status. Handy enough in his shutdown roles. Again, I don't think you're going to be picking him in any of his salary cap formats. James Aish keeps defensive mid status, so maybe you're looking to stash him away as a late draft pick in your draft league. Then there's a heap of guys that have lost DPP. Daniel Wells goes from mid forward to just forward status. Again, maybe worth a late stash in your draft league. It'd be brave to get him in a salary cap format. Varco, Cox, Dacos, DeGoey, all lose their DPP from last year and are just pure forwards this year, similar with Callum Brown. No, I'm not really sure any of them are really relevant unless there's a crazy discount for Jamie Elliott.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either. Another one that's maybe worth a quick highlight is that, especially in a keeper league, it's been, those who have been lucky enough to have Grundy there will have, been stashing away Cox behind him, just as a handcuff for your rucks, but, he's now lost his ruck status and there's a forward only. So, to use the same sort of strategy, you're relying on a Jordan Roughhead type now instead, which, may or may not play, regardless of whether Grundy does or not anyway.
Yeah, no, fair enough too. A couple of changes. Chris Maines, now just a midfielder only, again, only vaguely draft relevant. Similar with Will Hoskin-Elliott. He's moved from midfielder status to forward again. We're really scraping low in the bottom of the barrel for this one for you. But
Carlton here these last few minutes, so scraping the barrel sort of resonates, doesn't it? Oh, look, we've got Essendon next. That's great.
The fantasy relevance just keeps on coming. Aaron Francis is just a pure defender. He loses that defensive forward DPP. Then Andrew McGrath.
So just on Francis, I'd seen a couple of Supercoach pages suggesting that he was going to be a forward next year, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And if it was the case, A, that's baffling, and B, would be the first time ever that Supercoach have deviated from champion data. So I think for the minute, certainly when Team Pickers come out, that'll confirm it, but we can probably roll a line through that. He's very clearly defender only, I think.
I would think I would call that the MJ factor, which is a human error typo.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's anything too much to worry about that. And again, look, maybe his Supercoach draft relevant, maybe worth stashing away late in a keeper league, but in a salary cap format, you're not going anywhere near Aaron Francis at the price he's going to cost you. There's so much likely value we're going to get, not just in our top liners, such as a Sam Doherty, but even right towards the bottom end of the barrel. We'll talk through them in the 50 most relevant. Yep. You're just not going to need to go to those speculative mid prices in the back line this year. You're just not going to need to do it.
Yep, no, absolutely agree with that. But 50 most relevant, very excited to see that coming back.
Yeah, January 1st, daily articles, the podcast. Really looking forward to it. There's some surprises in there, that is for sure. Let's keep talking through the positional relevance, though. Andrew McGrath has added midfield status to go with his defensive. So maybe just flexibility more than anything else you're gaining. Probably was the year coaches, especially in keeper leagues, were kind of being bullish that he'd break out, and salary cap coaches similar, going, okay, look, he's shown some signs, maybe not as big a ceiling as we would have liked in a couple of games from Andrew McGrath, but there's positive signs, enough to kind of make you go, yep, there's something here. The inclusion, though, of Dylan Shield probably means that despite his average sticking around the same of, around that 70, which he's done for both his seasons, and I think it's like 40-odd games, that's the cooling of the jet for fantasy coaches now, isn't it? What is the impact Shield has to the midfield rotation and group?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly with these new rules in place where we're starting at 666, is he going to be in that middle group more often than not? You'd have to wonder at this point. And, but does that now, and is there going to be potential where he becomes that sort of halfback distributor instead? I think, the kid's got enough talent about him and enough nous to be able to find the ball, regardless of his position. And I think averaging what he has over 2 full seasons and his first 2 seasons of that shows that he's certainly got a bit about him. And I wouldn't be surprised if he is one that does jump up quite suddenly at some stage as well, despite those other inclusions. Again, whether it's this year or next or at some point down the track, he's another one that if he's not already owned by an Essendon supporter, because good luck getting him off one, he's one that I'd be trying to chase out the league as well.
Yeah, certainly agree with that, man. Darcy Parish retains his mid-forward status, as does Kyle Langford. If those guys can get themselves into the midfield rotation, I'd be then tempted in a draft. Salary cap, I think there's so many great forwards, and we're going to talk about one of them that has kept a forward status in just a moment. But there's so many great top-tier forwards that speculative guys like Langford and Parish, you're just not going to have to take that risk this year.
No, absolutely not. But as you said, very, very draft relevant, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Devon Smith, I made the call countless times throughout last year on our Facebook live videos and YouTube channel before we decided that, yes, we were able to come back and do the coaches panel again in 2019. I made the call countless times saying, look, there is not a planet in the known universe that you would confidently land on and say Devon Smith retains forward status. And yet here we are. Champion data have allocated that. I've got no problem with that. Yeah, none of us have the full access to the details and the informations and the breakdown of the positions. So you've got to put the trust in the fact that they're making the right call. But at the end of the day, we all get him. So it's not worth something. I've heard and seen people across social media going, how the heck did Devon Smith get it and not Dusty? And maybe, sure, that there's some valid perspective in that. But at the end of the day, great news is a guy that was a top tier forward this previous season, you're going to be able to have him again. Maybe not start with him based on the price and the options around, but the good news is you got 100 forward that you didn't think you'd have. So happy days. All right. That's enough talk about Essendon. Let's talk about Fremantle. Such a tiger. Probably the most relevant positional gain in terms of a positional change for Fremantle is Connor Blakely. He moves from midfielder status to defensive status, and whether or not he gets that Lockie Neal midfield rotation, midfield minutes kind of split or not, in one part is kind of irrelevant. No, I say that because he's shown even as a defender, he can push that average into the early 90s. He's in the conversation, you'd think, for a top 10 defender. Now, whether or not he's the one you want, by structures, the split with the defenders you want to start with in the premiums, because we've actually got a ton, like in the forward line too, a ton of these top tier defensive options, and which ones people go is really fascinating to me.
Oh, absolutely it is. And I actually really like that they've done that this year, and that, starting off with round one of the season, we can't pick all of the top line options in your forward line and your back line. It's, there's such a wide choice now. And so, it's going to make the starting team certainly a lot more unique than they have been in the past, I think, in some ways. In that, you've got so many options now. Fascinated to see which ones people choose to go with.
Yeah, I think so too. Like, even if you look at a buy structure for a second, like you look at round 14, Rory Laird and the Adelaide Crows, he's probably one of the top defenders you'd assume. Carlton, probably Doherty, maybe there's a big fall from grace, even if he can't get close to replicating. I still struggle to see a world where he's not over that 90 average. GWS will talk about them, but Lockie Whitfield has gained defensive status. So there's three big premiums for us, let alone if we happen to get anything from Gold Coast or Richmond, then you kind of head to that round 12 by the first one, which Fremantle on. Essendon, Port, Western Bulldogs, St Kilda, Hawthorn. Not really many premium defenders come straight to mind there.
Yeah, no, that's it. And that's only going to be part of the equation as well, of course. And then, when you look at the fixture run for the first few rounds and who they're up against and what sort of scores you're expecting there's a lot of things to consider in which ones you do start with and which ones you don't, equally important, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. Look, Stephen Hill's gained defensive status. He's moved as a midfielder, but probably not relevant in your salary cap formats. He was as a rookie and not much since then, but definitely in draft.
It would be great if you're playing waffle fantasy, I suppose.
You're on up in this episode, aren't you, mate? Just wait till we get to your Tigers. Adam Cerra has moved from a midfielder to a forward, like Paddy Dow, isn't he, Jimmy? This second-year player, gaining a new position. You might be able to, if you've got an impatient keeper league coach that you're in a league with. Yeah, I think he only averaged in the mid to high 50s across the formats. He's a ripper of a kid, probably the best of the lot from last year's draft. From a fantasy perspective, go out and get him. It might be hard now that he's a forward, but he's got fantasy chops all over about him.
Oh, yes, he does. Absolutely. No, I'm very, very keen there. And just watch if you're talking to someone about him pre-season and they're just refusing to budge and he comes out and has a few early average scores to start his year, you might find owners starting to panic a little bit and taking what they can get for him, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do, and jump all over that if you can.
Yep, no, certainly. A couple of DPP gains for Fremantle. Bailey Bamfield is one of those. He picked it up in AFL Fantasy last year, the forward status, but he's a dual position player, but again, probably not going near him. Mundy retains that mid-forward status, and I think he'll still get plenty of midfield time with the departure of Lockie Neal, as will Michael Walters. Travis Collier is fantasy irrelevant. A player, I'm just being blunt, a player that was fantasy relevant last year and is really going to hurt coaches this year, especially if you're keen to hold on to him in the keeper league. Ed Langdon goes from a mid-forward status, which kind of came out of nowhere. He's a midfielder only. He's kind of in no man's land in the averages, and he's not averaging enough to keep in a keeper league, but you kind of feel dirty delisting him, but even dirtier for trying to hold on to him, because it was just, this one out of the box. I'm not too sure if he's going to do that with some of the new recruits and inclusions to Fremantle, and we'll talk about one of them in a moment, but yuck. Yeah.
Yeah, hard to call on that one. I'd be inclined to keep him personally, but just on the off chance he does it again, I'd rather keep him and then get rid of him later than get rid of him and watch someone else enjoy. So that's it's a tough one, but yeah, that's got to be done, I think.
Yeah, I think so too.
Another really interesting option is no, you're right. I was just looking at the name directly below his, and Harley Bennell there has gone from a forward to a mid only, but he's another one where I think position's fairly irrelevant for him. If you think he's going to play a few games, he becomes relevant wherever he is.
His price is going to be the ultimate definer outside of his fitness and his body. But he is if you're going after Harley Bennell, I remember years ago, Ben wrote at the website an article about injury variation, but it was the basic premise of the article was if a player is quote unquote injury prone, start with them, don't trade them in, because the variables of them likely to get injured increase for every game that they play and they're fit. So someone like a Harley Bennell, who unfortunately the past 4 years or so of his career is just injury riddled, it's you start with him or you walk away completely regardless of the position. He's got to be dirt cheap. He's relevant if he can play, because the guy can score 90 in an average, which at his price point, you've got to consider. All you need is 6 games.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing too. You don't need to hold him all season. You just get a bit of cash out of him, take it and run.
Yeah, just head for the hills, and it's just it's like Bitcoin. Just get off as quickly as you can and hope you're on the right side of it. And then don't talk about it in 2019. Reece Conker was a defender. He's now a midfielder, only really fallen away in fantasy relevance now, even in drafts because of that. Luke Valenti should get some games early for Fremantle. He's a midfielder, cash cow only. The positive of him kind of dropping down the draft board on the draft days and night is he's just cheaper for us as fantasy coaches. That's the positive.
Oh, absolutely, and we don't complain about that at all. And he's at Fremantle where he should get a few games, you'd think.
Yeah, you'd think so. And that's something we'll talk about a fair bit in the preseason, not on this episode, but the vacancy of Lachie Neale from the Fremantle midfield. How are those midfield minutes reallocated? Is it a certain player? Is it a group of players? I think Valenti is certainly someone that needs to be in the conversation for someone that could take some of those midfield minutes. Not a great swap for, like for like replacement just yet, but certainly is someone in the conversation. Rory Lobb is a ruck forward. Maybe some draft relevance there for you, depending on how deep your draft is, but he's never shown great scoring potential as a forward when he's been there predominantly. His scoring potential is when he's solo rucked, but with the likes of Sandilands and also Darcy, who are going to lead that opportunity, well, I'm not too sure I could go there.
No, I'd be leaving that well alone, I think, personally.
Yeah, no, that's a fair enough point too. Let's head to the Geelong Football Club. There is one very, very big one that we'll talk about in just a few moments. On a slightly less relevant scale would be a Brandon Parfitt. He's just a pure forward only. Again, a great guy to go and jump after in a keeper league. Don't think I'd go anywhere near him just yet in the salary cap format, even though he had a ripping month kind of in that opening third of the year last year. I just don't have the confidence that Geelong would give him that role in the side that would make him a top-line forward. And as we've already said in this episode, there are so many great forward options this year, you probably don't need to take the risk on speculative breakouts if you don't really want to.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. And if you are going to take that sort of risk, there's probably better options than Parfitt. He might well be solid, but I don't think he's the one that you're looking for.
Yeah, I think so too. Sam Menegola retains mid-forward status. Some thought he may lose that, but he retains that, which is fantastic news for owners. I think he's in the conversation as a top 10 forward for us, that's for sure.
Yeah, and so his teammates in Tim Kelly, Luke Dalhouse, and Patrick Dangerfield now. Look at that.
There is a bunch of mid-forwards, and as you just said, Tim Kelly's picked up forward status, as has Patrick Dangerfield. Patrick Dangerfield now will be one of the most owned players in all of fantasy football. Whether or not you believe he can bounce back to those 115, 120, 130 days, depending on the format you play, is semi-irrelevant. I struggle to see a world where a forward outscores Patrick Dangerfield.
Yeah, there's certainly not going to be many ahead of him at the very least. I think that's when you can lock away quite safely. And I just wanted to touch just very quickly on where did he go? Just a couple of the young mids as well.
Yes.
Charlie Constable is still just a mid only. And Lockie Fogarty is the one that I've got just a little eye on as well. Certainly in terms of keeper league prospects, who's now gone from a mid only to a forward only.
Yep, no, there's certainly some relevance there, especially with both of those guys. Fogarty for keeper leagues, and then Constable, if for whatever reason there's some injuries that impact the Geelong midfield structure, He should get opportunities. A big, big lad. And, in time needs to get games in that aging midfield. While there's still the Selwoods, Abletts, Dangerfields, Menegolas, Duncan, Guthrie. There's so many people that can roll through there. Even Dalhouse now is an option to roll through there for them. He needs to get some opportunities at some point. And when he does, should be a good cash cow for us. Luke Dalhouse, we'll talk about him a little bit more. He'd need to get midfield minutes, and I'm not sold he's going to get a ton of them at Geelong. I think he's going to come back to that sort of 80 to 85 sort of pressure forward for us, where he does get some midfield minutes. He does impact the scoreboard, but that defensive work that he's done so well previously at the Western Bulldogs, I think he, as well as Gary Rowan, will add some new dynamics to that Geelong forward line rather than to the Geelong midfield.
Yeah, absolutely. The difference between the two, of course, is Dalhouse is very relevant for drafts, and Gary Rowan is not.
Sure.
I think that's fairly straightforward there. Shall we move on to Gold Coast?
Look at you, just wanted to get it done. You don't want to talk about that Reece Stanley's just a pure ruck?
Is he relevant either way? I don't know.
In drafts, there's something there, but that's about it. From a Gold Coast perspective, Charlie Ballard moves from a forward midfielder. He just has pure defensive status. Pierce Hanley has lost his DPP, but is still a defensive option, and depending on his price point, could be a tasty option for us if he is fit. And then there is a ton of defensive forward options that have kind of added in to the Gold Coast Suns. Callum Archie is now a defensive forward from just a pure forward. Jacob Heron is a defensive forward. Lockie Weller is a defensive mid. I believe he was just a midfielder last year, a defender last year. Regardless, he should be one of those guys that takes on greater responsibility in the Gold Coast Suns midfield this year. And look, again, I'm not so sure I'd be going near him in a salary cap, but in a draft, you should be able to get a little bit of value there with Lockie Weller.
Yeah, I'd have thought so. He's certainly one to keep an eye on, absolutely. And Jack Martin's another one, I think, too, that's worth watching. He was just a forward last year, is mid-forward this year. Kid's got a bit of talent to him, and he showed some decent scoring at times last year as well.
Yeah, he certainly did. Harry Wiggs moved from midfielder status to just pure defensive. Now, he was only picked up recently as a rookie in the rookie draft. So the fact that he was kind of delisted and re-rookied does say a little bit about where the club rates him in terms of his likelihood of being in their initial eyes of best 22, especially with the inclusion of a whole heap of recycled players. I'm not so sure Harry Wiggs anywhere in that conversation just yet, but if he does get into the side, he'll be basement price cash cow, and if he can get 4, 5, 6 games for us in a run, he should make some money.
Oh yeah, that's it. Keep an eye on him, but certainly don't bank on starting him at any time.
No, I wouldn't have thought so. Corey Ellis, the former Tiger, retains his defensive mid status. And again, depending on his price point, you should strongly consider this guy. A fantasy scorer. You're the Tigers supporter, so you can talk about him better than I, but really good user of the ball too. Tigers would have been a little bit sad to see him go.
Yeah, that's it. He never quite made it at senior level with the Tigers. He was always clearly a cut above in the VFL, and you can expect him to get 45 possessions a week in the NEFL, I suppose, on that form. But when he does play seniors with the Suns, it would be very interesting to see just what sort of form he can bring there. He's, as you said, beautiful user of the footy. He's a great kick. Whether he's going to step up at that level or not is the real question mark on him, I think, at this point.
No, absolutely it is, that's for sure. You may be considering a Chris Burgess as a cash cow option for us. Again, not sure at time of recording how these guys that were kind of the pre-selected players out of state leagues what they're going to be priced at, that's not been revealed just yet. So depending on his price point, there could be some fantasy relevance there. Rankin, Lukosius and King, they're 3 early picks. They've all picked up forward status. Shear is a mid forward, but I don't think there's any real relevance for any of that moving on from the Gold Coast Suns. Please take me. When we look at GWS, there's one real big one, isn't there? Lockie Whitfield gains defensive status. Zach Williams is back in the side. The likelihood of him moving back up, higher up the ground, which we did see during the finals, is likely to happen. So he could sneak into that midfield rotation, back out on the wing, and probably average similar to what he's done historically. But as a defender, he should be in that top 10 conversation.
Yeah, I'd expect so. He's one that you'd have to look at very, very, very hard, and if you don't pick him, you'd be sweating on him every week, watching him burn you. I think, it's makes that a very easy choice. I think, just quietly.
Yeah, look, there's a bit of tag potential about him, sure, but when you've got the likes of Josh Kelly rolling through the side, and to let him off the hook, it's dangerous. And that's kind of the sign of a good side, isn't it? When you can shut down on one player, but then you've got 2 or 3 other guys that are going to punish you equally as much. And, Lockie Whitfield is certainly a player that if you give him too much time and space with the ball, he is absolutely going to cut you up. But then if you lock him down, Josh Kelly's going to go and do the exact same thing.
Oh, that's it. And they've got any number of players that are capable of that too these days, I think.
Canelio, Ward, Hopper, Taranto, just keeps going on and on. Speaking of Taranto, he's lost forward status, similar to McCluggage. People might have expected him to retain that and be in that conversation as one of the best forwards. You don't have that option anymore. Not so sure he'll jump up to be the elite premium or the big Uber premium you want. Maybe you're prepared to take the gauntlet in an AFL fantasy and get a little bit of value there, but I think there's more fat on the bone of some cheaper options that could score in that high 90s that you could go after rather than getting a guy already at his price point.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. And certainly still very draft relevant, I think, but not so much in your salary formats.
Yeah, I think so too. Look, Brett Delidio was a forward last year. He's a midfielder only. You just can't pick him, can you? Like, even in a keeper league, depending on the size of the keepers it is, like, you'd be throwing him back into the pool at that point, based on not just injury and history and things like that. Yeah, again, depends on how deep the league is.
Yeah, that's it. He certainly loses an awful lot of relevancy even as a depth. I do agree with that. Another one who's lost a lot of relevancy, I think, is not that he had a huge amount to begin with, is Adam Tomlinson, who's lost his defensive status and is now a mid only as well.
Yeah, look, if you're picking Adam Tomlinson in your draft league, there's certainly some potential there. You're running real deep in the draft. We're talking you're keeping, you need more than 30 people in your squad. You need 40 people in your squad, and that's when you're looking at Tomlinson. Look, maybe he gets it in Ultimate Footy back again, but for me, you don't want to go anywhere near him. We want to talk Hawks for a second. James Sicily loses forward status, but keeps his defensive status, which was kind of expected. Jarman Impey, still a forward eligible option, but now also a defensive forward. So there's something potentially for you there. Chad Wingard, still a mid forward. Harry Morrison moves from defensive status to mid forward. James Worpel, midfielder last year, now just a mid forward. They, and probably along with Jonathan Segler, who's picked up forward status as well, they're probably the big relevant ones.
That's it. There's not a whole lot else I'm looking at on that list there that I think, that needs a mention. It's all pretty bland, I think.
Yeah, look, and someone like Segler, depending on his price and your starting ruck structure, again, something we'll talk about. Look, maybe there's something there. Sicily should be among, again, one of the top 10 defensive options across all your formats. Worpel, draft relevant because he's now picked up that forward status, but you probably shouldn't be going anywhere near him, kind of outside of that. From a Melbourne Football Club perspective, nothing super duper crazy out of the mix here. Harms loses his forward status and is just a pure midfielder. Brayshaw loses his defensive status, just a pure midfielder. Aaron Vandenberg adds midfielder status to his forward. But nothing hugely, like no one's standing there going, oh my gosh, Brayshaw, you lost defensive status. How did that, everybody knew and expected that was going to happen.
That's it. There's nothing too much out of the box there. It's nice to see Petrarca holding on to his forward status on mid this year. That's nice, but there's no surprises in that one.
Is this the year he's going to finally break out as a fantasy footballer? Because he keeps showing signs. There's those comparisons early in his career to Dustin Martin, rightly or not. But is he a bit more of the slow build? Again, not this type of play, but like a Patrick Dangerfield, that we just thought this was his year of breaking out. And he's just forever teasing. But then when he does, he just goes full breakout mode and then is an absolute fantasy beast.
Yeah, look, I wouldn't be at all surprised. I'm not putting money on it, but certainly would not be surprised.
No, all right, fair enough too. Let's keep moving on into North Melbourne. Luke McDonald loses the midfielder part of his DPP, but he's a defensive-only option. Majak Dawes, probably the biggest change. And in a Supercoach draft league, I actually think there's some relevance there. Elsewhere, maybe not, but maybe a category league. He went from ruck forward to defensive status, so there's potentially something there. Probably the one that's caught people, maybe not by surprise, but caught people off a little bit was Paul Ahern, loses DPP and is just a pure midfielder. And really, in keeper leagues, goes from coaches that thought, yep, going to keep him. He's in my best 16, 18, 12, 20, however many as you keep. Now as a pure midfielder, you're really going all in on banking on him being that fantasy player that you thought he was.
Yeah, it's a very tough call, that one. I've got to make that choice in a couple of leagues myself soon. So that, it's tough. I wasn't expecting that. Thought he'd keep forward at least one more year. But, it's a big gamble now to see if he can rise as quickly as we hoped he would.
Yes, certainly is.
Meanwhile, nice to see
Aaron Halls
get forward status as well.
I was about to say Zeeble has got forward status. He was a pure midfielder last year. Aaron Hall's just a midfielder. There was some talk he may pick up defensive dual position, but that has not happened. Jed Anderson is just a pure midfielder this year. Curtis Taylor, if you're looking for a cash cow option, he could break his way into the side. There's a lot of midfielders competing for spots in that side. And even guys that are bringing in, run and carry and speed like Hall and Pollock have come into the side. So he may not get games early, but there's something potentially there with him. Not much heaps about North Melbourne I want to talk about. Maybe we can look at Port Adelaide for a second. And again, nothing super crazy outside of Justin Westhoff going as a mid-forward to now a forward ruck. Yep, you heard me right. It's because he spent so much time. No, he spent so much time as a ruck. But, we'll talk about Port Adelaide more in the pre-season, but Lysette into the side, Ryder's there, Charlie Dixon. They love playing Todd Marshall and getting games into him. They've already got a pretty established and well-set back line, and Hamish Hartlett and Matty Broadbent need to break their way back into that side. I just don't see how Westhoff goes back. He's never scored this well before. It's like a 10 to 15 point jump per game off a personal best.
Absolutely. And then you're not going to pay that price for him now either. That's, no way.
Gosh, no. No, I can't see how he gets anywhere near repeating that, let alone why he should go anywhere near that. So look, great for maybe in your keeper league, you didn't have a ruck. And you happen to have Westhoff, and now you've kind of got a guy that can go high 80s and be a hybrid carrier for a year. Then great, well done you. You've got a little bit of luck, but look, outside of that, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near that. Travis Boakes lost DPP, but he is still a forward. On the reverse, Robbie Gray goes from just being a forward to a mid-forward. He's got some Supercoach relevance, Robbie Gray, but how they look to use him with no Chad Wingard is certainly something we look to keep an eye on. That's kind of really it from Port, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Trengove, if he can finally get his way back into the team again, he's now a defender instead of a midfielder. I always liked the kid. I don't know if he's ever going to fully recover from the the nightmares he had at Melbourne, but he's there.
Yeah, he's there. That's a nice way to put it. Look, Scott Lycett to ruck forward. Again, gives you some flexibility, not much else. Xavier Gersma, he's a very fantasy-relevant cash cow. He's a defensive midfielder, as is Connor Rosie, defensive forward. Maybe a little too expensive, given what he could produce from a fantasy perspective. But look, both of those guys should get options. Zach Butters, just a pure midfielder. I thought he might have jagged some forward status there from Champion Data. I think he's going to be the guy that they look to use inside forward 50 a little bit. Really classy player, adds some pressure and speed around the ball. Maybe there's something there, but again, he's going to be pretty pricey for a guy I expect to spend a lot of time inside forward 50.
Yeah, no, I'd move on.
All right, well, we'll talk about your Tigers. Really only two dual position players. Oh, look, there's all of a sudden he's all up and about. Only really two dual position players to talk about. Shane Edwards retains mid-forward status. Freakishly good player, but probably not really fantasy relevant. Callum Coleman-Jones was a ruck last year. He adds forward status. I guess, while we're talking about rucks and Richmond, that's going to be a much debate and conversation over the preseason. What do Richmond do with a secondary ruck option in 2019? Do they continue on with Greg? Do they use the Rolls Royce of Tom Lynch into that role? Do they look to a Soldo? Do they look to a Callum Coleman-Jones? Even a Chol? I don't know. That's going to be one of the talking points across the preseason for Richmond.
Oh, absolutely it is. And, look, and any of those things, potentially make some sort of sense too. I'd be lying if I said I had any idea on what they might be rolling with at this point, but I'm very interested to see how they go about it.
Yeah, I agree with that. A couple of guys that have lost dual position status and are now just forward only is Josh Caddy and Kane Lambert, and Jack Higgins. The thing that made them relevant, though, is their forward status. All of those guys have retained that. That's handy. Look, Patrick Naish intrigues me. He was a mid-forward last year. He's just a defender. How far off is he from getting into Richmond's kind of 22 to 25?
Yeah, look, I don't know. He had a pretty good season in the VFL, but there's still it's a hard 22 to break into. I'm not sure how he's going to get there without an injury or suspension to a couple of guys ahead of him at this point. I'd love to see him play. He's looked great from what little I've seen of him, but I don't know how soon he'll be getting there.
No, that's true. And Richmond have added some extra bigger bodies in that midfield, which Naish certainly isn't, with the likes of a Collier Dawkins, but they've still got so many of the Mosquito fleet up there that aren't getting regular game time, that are continuing to push into that side, the likes of Shai Bolton, Liam Baker. Again, he's not really a pressure forward, Patrick Naish. So, it's going to be interesting. But look, he's one to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. As are a few of those other kids you mentioned. Meanwhile, Brandon Ellis keeps his defensive status, which is nice. And, there's not a whole lot of positional change relevance. Camden McIntosh, if you were using him as a very deep depth option in a draft league of some sort, is a mid only now. He's lost his defensive eligibility. And, beyond that, there's not a whole lot more to talk about, I think, other than the joy of talking about Richmond.
I made a vow that for the coaches panel in 2019, the name of Camden McIntosh would not get mentioned. But here we are on the first podcast of the year talking about. No, he's a lovely man with a fantastic touch.
Or not, I'm impressed that you picked up on it.
Yeah, and I didn't have to go to the swear jar, so that was a good sign. Let's talk about St Kilda, speaking of the swear jar. And there's a couple of relevant moves for us. A couple of their kids last year. Nick Caulfield has lost his DPP but kept the defensive part, so that's where his relevance is. Hunter Clark, just a pure defender this year. He was a midfielder for us last year. Dan Hanbury joining the club. He's still retaining that midfield status. Jack Nunes has added forward to his midfield status, so that's a handy gain for you. Blake Acres keeps mid-forward status. That's good news. He's shown some handy scoring for you. Then kind of one that kind of caught me by surprise, but takes him from kind of absolute irrelevance anywhere to at least let's have a conversation about David Armitage. He's a mid-forward.
No, let's not.
And for a draft league, no.
Nah.
Is he your Camden McIntosh, is he?
Oh, no, look, I wouldn't go that far. I just, look, he's, as you say, he's picked up forward status now, so that makes him interesting in some ways in a deeper sort of draft, but, well, he's at the tail end of his career, I think, and if St Kilda do want to be taking strides forward, they don't want to be giving him 22 games. I wouldn't have thought at this point. It's, they've got to start developing some of these kids a little bit more. Armitage, I don't think, is the answer for them, and even if he is, I don't know that he's at the peak of his scoring anymore either, unfortunately.
No, he's not, but that's where I'd like take some of his games from around 15, 16, 17, where he's scoring tons. I'd float that near somewhere in a keeper league and say, look, he can score, and then just hope you get like a round 20 draft pick for him and then run. That's his relevance for you.
Yeah, no, I'm happy with that.
Not much else. Getting close to wrapping up our positional podcast conversation up from a Sydney perspective. Ryan Clark retains his defensive status. Zach Jones is moving from midfielder to defensive status. Nick Blakey, their new father-son recruit, he's a forward only. He could be of certain fantasy interest. Again, we need to see the price. We need to see what other forward cash cows we get. But he's a really highly touted youngster. Depending on the price, depending on if he gets games early, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, no, he's definitely in that conversation. Absolutely.
Maybe. Isaac Heaney keeps his mid-forward status. Tom Papley is just a pure forward. Yuck. Jackson Thurlow is just a pure midfielder. George Hewitt, is just a pure midfielder. Kieran Jack, pass. Well, that's the interesting one, Ollie Florent. He's someone you've talked a couple of times throughout this episode around keeper league coaches getting impatient with the development of young players. And Ollie Florent moves from dual position status, forward status, to just a pure midfielder. He's got fantasy potential all over him. More opportunities opening up. Now, while many believe Callum Mills will get some of Dan Hanbury's midfield rotation, which could very well be the case, Ollie Florent is the outside run and class that Sydney have lacked in their side for so many years. I actually think he could be a guy that picks up plenty of that time.
Oh, absolutely. I don't expect him to average 100 this year, but I do expect him to have a pretty sizable jump on what he's done in the last couple. So he's definitely one to keep a little bit of an eye on, especially as you said in drafts.
Yeah, all right. Last couple of clubs before we wrap up this podcast episode. Let's talk about the West Coast Eagles. Again, nothing super huge and super crazy to kind of focus on. Brandon Archie was really popular last year as a potential breakout option. He's lost the midfielder part but retained his forward status. Probably the big one, Elliot Yeo moves from defensive mid to in fact, he was just a pure defender last year. He's now just a midfielder. He still scored well enough, though, to be amongst the top midfielders. Now, whether or not you're game enough to go there is another story. But he's still relevant.
He's relevant, but yeah.
You're not so
it's
surprised.
A ballsy pick. Look, it's a ballsy pick to start with him. Either you're over keen, I think, or you're an Eagles fan. He's as you said, he's certainly got some good scoring about him, but he's a hard one to pick, given some of the other options we've got. But that said, I don't want to talk anyone out of him. As you say, he's scored well enough at times to justify that starting position there. So if you think he's going to do that or do better again, then by all means back him in.
Well, what makes him interesting is, again, purely from a salary cap perspective, looking at who he shares his buy round with, just purely in the midfield group. You've got, from a Melbourne perspective, Clayton Oliver would be leading the charge. Maybe you're going an Angus Brayshaw or a Jack Viney. I don't think either of those two, but definitely Clayton Oliver, Collingwood. You've got a plethora of potential premium options through there. Brisbane, do you go for a Lachie Neale? Do you think he's going to keep re-emerging as a fantasy player? Geelong, again, plethora of options. Sydney, guys like a Luke Parker, while hasn't been that big 105, 110, 115 mid kind of premium that we'd all hoped he'd be again. You know he's got the fantasy skills about him to go absolute uber mode on us at any given time. So these are the kind of guys he's competing with, let alone the likes of an Andrew Gaff that's in his own side.
Yeah, absolutely. But just to back over that, the start of that list you mentioned there, you're writing off Angus Brayshaw as a starting option next year?
I'm not writing it off as a starting option. I would be, what was he priced? That kind of 100, 105 kind of marker through there. I think, yes, there's some development. Yes, there's some growth, but I feel like he's the kind of guy I'd rather upgrade to rather than start with. When you start looking at guys going, okay, who are you likely to start with across the formats? Likely to start with Tom Mitchell. Now, you're going to be paying an absolute crud load for him, but he's certainly a guy that you go, I'm confident he's going to be a top 10 sort of midfielder. And that's who you're starting these players over 100 points per game in average. They're probably guys you're thinking, I'm banking on them being top 5, top 10. Otherwise, why are you starting with them? Get the locks in there. You're probably then looking at guys, do you look at a McRae? Do you look at a Fife if he's fit? Do you look at one of the Collingwood, dozen? Do you look at a Kelly? Do you look at a Crouch? Do you look, at a Duncan or a Ross or a Merritt? Now we're starting to head into the less likely top 10s in some of these names. But so that's where for me with an Angus Brayshaw, it's very much around, is he a guaranteed top 10? No, probably not guaranteed. Is he guaranteed top 20? No, probably not. So I'd rather upgrade him and be wrong than start with him and be wrong, if that makes sense.
No. I can certainly appreciate that. He had a blistering run home, didn't he?
He was.
It's a lot to like.
He's got a lot to like about him, and I'm in a couple of keeper leagues too, so I'm certainly not confirmation bias guilty there. But for me, there's some midfielders I like considerably more that I feel more comfortable personally investing the cash on. But if someone said I'm going for him, I go, oh, he's got the ceiling about him. I'm not going to do it, but God bless you on your way, my brother. That is for sure. Let's talk about the Bulldogs before we answer a couple of questions that have been sent in to us. Probably from a Western Bulldog perspective, two big retentions is probably the best way to put it. Toby McLean keeping mid-forward status, Josh Dunkley keeping forward status, but adding to that is his midfield DPP. How they get used, who gets the midfield minutes, what happens because Tom Liberatore returns. Big questions, but great news for coaches, because Dunkley on the run home was awesome. McLean for the first half of the year, phenomenal.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definite decision to make between the two there, or both, as some might I've seen suggested on social media recently are going to go for. So that'll certainly be interesting. Meanwhile, those who hang on to Sam Lloyd in a deeper keeper league, hoping he might be more relevant at a new club, or be disappointed to see he's mid-only instead of the forward status he had last year.
Yeah, give him the Brett Deledio. He's done.
That's it. No more. And Bailey Dale.
Hayden Crozier as a defender.
Status. Yep.
Yeah, he has.
Bailey Dale's picked up forward, and Caleb Daniel is a forward only as well now. So there's a few more dogs in the forward line that certainly in a draft are worth a little look.
Yeah, and again, speaking of draft, depending on your structure and your strategy, what the Bulldogs choose to do is going to be of big interest. But Tom Boyd has picked up ruck status to go, forward status to go with his ruck. Tim English, it's a pure ruck. Certainly he's their long-term, kind of great option through there. Trengove is now just a pure defender. So, look, if you were going to be looking to handcuff some doggies, it's got to be an English-Boyd combination that you're looking to roll through there. I feel very nervous running with that as a combination in my draft league, but I've certainly seen crazier things. But, I just don't know if I could go near that myself.
Nah, probably not. But look, at some point, English will break out, you think, and become a top line option. That was why they took him as early as they did, and why a lot of people in keeper leagues have hung on to him all these years. So one day he might get there. Whether it's this year or not is another question, I guess. But yeah, one day.
All right, fair enough. Hey, before we wrap up,
25.
No, that's exactly right. That is exactly right. Hey, before we wrap up the episode, got a ton of questions that we've been sent through. We want to get through them. Some of them come via our Patreon members. Thank you so much for your support. If you want to join our Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/coaches panel to get some exclusive and early access to some of our 2019 content. Richos has asked this question for you though, Jimmy. It's a keeper league question. Merritt or Kelly? Who are you going to pick in a keeper league if you can only have one?
If we're for starting a brand new keeper league, I'd
yeah, sure.
Basis, I guess. Yeah, look, I think it comes down to personal preference. To be perfectly honest, I like Kelly more as a player. I enjoy watching him.
Yep.
So I'd probably take him, and for no real other reason than that. They've both got that same sort of bracket of scoring potential of that sort of 110-ish, give or take a bit. I think you pick the player you like most in that sort of a case.
Yeah, Kelly's got a bit more untagability about him. I know that's not proper grammar. And Merritt's got a bit more of that junk time football about him. But yeah, look, if you've got two picks are on the board and Merritt and Kelly are still there, you can't go bad with either of those picks. That's for sure. Ian wants to know, can Dusty bounce back to fantasy relevance for us this year?
Of course he can. Load up.
Oh gosh, you're asking a Tiger supporter that. I should not have asked you that question. I should have spent much more time.
I'd rather him have another premiership medal than another 110 average personally, but we may well see him with both this year. Who knows?
You're going for both.
Absolutely, why not? But look, I don't think it's any secret that he scored less than we expected him to 2018. There's no reason why that can't bounce back and be a little bit better in 2019. That's, we know he's got that capability. If you think he can, then, he presents value. That's great.
Yep, no, certainly does too. Calza wants to know your thoughts on Kyle Langford being a sneaky point of difference in Supercoach. We talked about him a little bit earlier.
Yeah, look, he's got that potential, but at the end of the year, I don't think many of us would expect him to be a top 10 forward option. And at the start of the year, is he going to present enough value to make him worth picking at that mid-price range versus finding a little bit of extra cash for a premium or spending a bit less for someone with more meat on the bone? He's presents as a quality option, but I don't know that he's the best point of view, the best player to start with. But very happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, no, fair enough. On that conversation, talking about price points and guys that present value versus guys that are premiums, Jake says, is it worth going for a couple of mid-prices like a Brodie Smith and an Anthony Miles than opposed to a gun and rook approach of Lockie Whitfield and Bailey Smith? Of course, dangerous when you don't know their prices to answer this question.
Oh, of course it is. Look, and it's really a piece of string question, and then that comes down to the overall structure of your side as much as anything, and what you feel more comfortable with. I'm kind of sitting on the fence a little bit there, but I don't think it's necessarily a right or a wrong way to do it. And you won't know the right or wrong players to pick until the season's well and truly in. So and I think at the end of it, you just got to look at that price versus points and what you expect those players to do, and make sure those expectations are reasonable.
Yeah, and then you probably add in the extra variation of the trades that are going to be used in that combination. Do you expect a Miles and a Smith to become guys that you keep in your side? You're thinking that with Lockie Whitfield. Now, you're going to look to trade Smith out in that regards anyway, but it's all those variables in it. It's price, it's scoring potential, what your genuine, realistic thoughts are. I think they're going to go here.
Yeah.
Is that enough cash generation? Would you get the same prices, the points on field from a cash cow at that point? How many trades are you going to use? How many other premiums you've got? It's not just ever a simple 2 versus 2 combination. There's multi-layers and multi-variables involved.
Oh, absolutely there is, and that's what makes the game interesting.
Yeah, it certainly does. Last couple of questions. Matt wants to know, and again, the caveat is because right now at time of recording, we don't know the full prices. They haven't been revealed by Supercoach or Dream Team yet, and AFL Fantasy will start. If it's anything like the previous few years, start rolling them out gradually across December and January till the format opens every couple of days. But who do you think is a potential early pick for R2 in the salary caps? He says Grundy is a clear number one, but he's very interested to see what people think for R2. Is it another year of set and forget, Jimmy, or is it the year of lock one and try to find some value?
Well, I guess I wouldn't talk someone out to picking a Grundy and Gawn combo again. You know that if they do well, they're going to do very, very well and be very hard for any other combo to catch. But whether we can find some value in another ruck, and this comes back in a lot of ways to what we were talking about just a minute ago with that mid-pricer thing, is going to be the thing. I don't know what price as yet Shane Mumford's going to be at, but is he going to be a valid option for us to consider? There's going to be no doubt at some point we're going to find one club's got an injured R1 and their R2 who's dirt cheap is going to step up and they might become valid. There's a lot of variables in that sort of thing. And, I think much like, every other position on the ground, if you're not picking the guy that you think is going to be the best overall player for that position for the year, you're picking someone who's going to help you get to that guy quicker than, mid-price or a rookie in another line. So, I don't see anything at all wrong with going a more speculative R2 as long as you've got the right reasons to justify it.
Yeah, and that'll be something that, as you alluded to when we talked a bit before, once prices are known, that's the quantifiable that then helps us. Yes, we know the positions. We know who's relevant for us there. We know who's available for us there. Now it's about what's the price tag associated with these players. Is there the discount that you expected in a certain player? Is it a greater discount or less? How are you going to structure your side based on the buyers, fixtures, all the things that right throughout the preseason here at Coaches Panel, we are here to help you have hopefully your best ever fantasy football season. Hey, Jimmy, appreciate your work on this episode, looking through the positions for 2019.
No worries, mate. Absolute pleasure.
Of course, if you've been on the journey with the Coaches Panel, whether it be just a matter of days or years, we're excited to have you on the journey with the Coaches Panel. That's our new name, mate. We're the Coaches Camel. Back for 2019.
There you go.
There you go. That's how we're going to make it work. We have the podcasts all landing for you with the 50 most relevant starting January 1. In fact, I'll even do one before that, kind of walking you through the concept of the 50 most relevant so you know exactly what to expect. Daily articles, relaunching a whole new website. The old has gone, the new has come. And the Coaches Panel here to help you with articles right throughout your pre-season, looking at the club by clubs, looking at best 22s, JLTs, 50 most relevant, and a whole stack more. Heaps of content coming through our Facebook and Twitter social media channels. And of course, if you want to be a part of supporting the Coaches Panel, one of the great ways you can do that is by becoming a part of our Patreon, which you can do at our patreon.com/Coaches Panel. You don't have to do it, but if you'd like to, we certainly won't say no to that. We cannot wait to do the fantasy footy journey with you in 2019 because, my friend, it is underway.